Hi everybody, and welcome to this webinar for employers that pay the apprenticeship levy, where we'll be updating you on pledging and transferring apprenticeship funds. I'm Nick Duff from the Service Engagement team within the Apprenticeship Service, and I have the pleasure of hosting today's session. Can I just remind everybody that by registering and attending today, you've given your consent and you're agreeing for the webinar to be recorded and uploaded onto our YouTube channel. If you feel that you've changed your mind regarding that consent, can I please ask that you dial off? Okay, so I'm happy to say that today I'm joined by a few colleagues to deliver the session. I have John Myers, who's head of the Apprenticeship Funding Policy team, and by Kate McDonough, who's a senior manager in funding policy. They'll be providing an overview of the transfers and the new service to date, and a bit of background relating to transfers and the policy intent. And in addition to these guys, I've got Natasha Porter, who's a product owner on the Apprenticeship Service for transfers, and she'll be taking you through the employer journey that sending employers go through with the new service. And then finally, I'm really happy to say that we'll be hearing from Nicola Drury, who's the UK apprenticeship lead for Amazon, and she'll be taking us through their transfers journey. So a big welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us. Next slide, please. Okay, so it's time for me to hand over to John and Kate, and they'll be going through our first input. So John and Kate, over to you.
Thanks very much, Nick. Good afternoon, everybody. Very pleased to see so many of you on the call today. I'm just going to start off with an overview of transfers. So, as many of you know, transfers have been around for a little while now. When we introduced the levy, April 2018, we enabled large businesses to transfer up to 10% of their funds to small businesses. We got a lot of feedback from employers saying that they welcome that, but could we increase it? And so we did so in April 2019, so that as a large employer, you could send up to 25% of your funds to small businesses to help them to benefit from apprenticeships. So any large business that pays a levy can choose to spend their unused apprenticeship funds by transferring them to other employers. Clearly, that's what we're here to discuss today. As you know, as with all apprenticeships, transferred funds are to pay for the training and assessment cost. They can't cover things like wages, for example. And one very important fact to know is that an employer that's sending the funds is we prioritise the payment on a monthly basis to those employers that are supporting with transfers over their own apprenticeships. That's a very important thing and gives you a degree of assurance if you're a receiving employer. If you can move us on to the next slide, please. So why do a transfer? Well, there are some great benefits for both the sending and the receiving employer. The benefits of doing a transfer are that you as a levy payer get to direct where you want to spend your unutilised levy. You can choose to keep it in your local area, support your geography, and if you're a public sector organisation like an NHS trust or a local authority in particular, that's something you'd be keen to do. Or you can choose to support your supply chain, support SMEs, perhaps address some critical skill shortage areas. So if you're a retail organisation, perhaps you are concerned about logistics, HGV drivers, perhaps you want to support those. Maybe it be around food manufacturing if you're a grocer. So lots of different areas you can, and flexibility, you can choose to decide who you want to support with your funds. Importantly though, it's not just about transferring the funds. We want to encourage large levy payers to also build a relationship with the organisations they choose to support, be they their supply chain or be they just an organisation in the community. So it gives you a great deal of flexibility about identifying who you want to support, making sure that they fit with your own values, your own business ethos, and that therefore you're able to help your own organisation to benefit from this as well. So it's very much about encouraging you to really think about making a transfer following the call today. Again, if you could move us on. So a little bit more on the background here. So as part of the September 2020 spending review, there was an announcement made about increasing flexibilities around apprenticeships. One of those was the improvement to the transfer system so that you could create a pledge as a large levy payer and specify what it is you want to support. And obviously I've just covered that in terms of some of the benefits that you accrue as a large levy payer deciding to do transfers. So in making these changes, we've spoken with a significant number of stakeholders, large employers, SMEs and training providers, as well as intermediaries like the combined authorities, many of whom have been running successful transfer services now for a little while. They told us about the barriers that we needed to overcome, and we hope we've addressed those. And the three key areas we've focused on are around making it easier for an employer to find another employer to send the transfer to. And we'll take you through the detail on that, but essentially we've now got a .gov page in place, which anybody can look at, it's publicly facing, which shows the pledges that each large employer would like to make. We're also putting in changes to reduce the amount of administration that large levy payers have to do in order to make a transfer. And fundamentally, a very important thing is that we are improving the finance view, so that organisations that are making a transfer can maximise their transfer allowance, not just in this year, but in future years as well. Because when making a transfer, you're supporting the full life of the apprenticeship. And therefore, that might be longer than a year, might be 2 years, might be 3 years, might be 4 years. So you need to understand your commitment beyond just 1 year. Can we move on to the next slide? And I'm going to hand you over to Kate McDonough now, who's going to take you through the Pledge and Transfer Service in more detail.
Thanks, John. So we launched the new online Pledge and Transfer Apprenticeship Fund service back in September 2021. So as John has touched on, levy payers are able to advertise the funds that they have available to transfer, which we call a pledge, and they can specify the certain criteria around the apprenticeships that they want to fund and support. So this could be the location, the sector, the type of job, and or the apprenticeship level. And as John mentioned, these pledges are then advertised publicly on gov.uk. Any employer, provider or intermediary body can view and search these pledges. However, it is important to note that it's only employers that can apply for a pledge, as this will be done via their Apprenticeship Service account. Since the initial launch back in September, we have released further functionality, which includes the option to auto-approve apprentices or cohorts, and Natasha will be going into these in more detail when she runs through a demonstration of the service in a bit. We've also recently launched in-service notifications, so you will now receive a task on your account homepage when a transfer application is received. And we've been really pleased to see how levy employers are engaging with the new service. So as of the 4th of February, we had 119 pledges being advertised, and I had a look this morning and that's actually increased by another 5, so that's really great to see. And over the last couple of months, we have started to see a number of actual starts being funded by these pledges. However, where you already know the receiving employer that you want to work with, you can still go down the direct transfer connection route, which was the original way of connecting for transfers. Next slide, please. So we are continuing to release some further enhancements to the service over the next few months. And these will include the option to set the location criteria by local authority. We know that this is important for employers such as NHS trusts and local councils. And as John mentioned, we are looking at improvements to the financial view. So this will include a finance overview of your transfer commitments in future years, as well as being able to see granular detail of apprentices you are funding. And there will also be the option to export this information into Excel. We are looking to hold webinars in March to cover the finance releases in more detail, so please look out for these. Next slide, please. So a bit of good practice for sending employers. So when using the new pledge function, it is important to review the applications that you receive in a timely manner. So if you know that you're not able to fund an application, then please let the employer who has applied for the pledge know as soon as possible, so they can then look at other options to fund their apprentice. We are aware that some employers work with intermediary bodies who help support with the administration work around transfers, and I will go into this in a bit more detail in a couple of slides' time. Before you accept a transfer application, you may have your own in-house governance process to follow. So the contact details of the employer applying for the transfer will be on their application form to assist you with this. And you can also use these details to contact the employer if you are waiting for them to formally accept your transfer funds. Sending employers cannot impose conditions on the receiving employer, such as choosing their main provider for them. However, if that receiving employer asks for your advice or your opinion on training providers, then this can be given. We really want to ensure that apprentices receive a good quality apprenticeship, and choosing the right provider is essential for this. So you'll have greater knowledge of which training providers are right for certain apprenticeship programmes. And as John mentioned earlier, we would really like Levy employers to build relationships with their receiving employers. For those smaller and medium-sized employers, especially those that are taking on an apprentice for the first time, advice from you can be really important. And again, it helps to ensure that a good quality apprenticeship is delivered. Next slide, please. So we understand that there have been some concerns around approving transfers and what checks you as sending employers should make. Therefore, we just wanted to confirm the following to you. So as mentioned, in order to apply for a transfer, the employer must do this via their Apprenticeship Service account. In order to obtain this account, they have to register with HMRC, then receive their PAYE number, and then submit payroll data to HMRC whilst advising of their intention to take on an apprentice. Once these steps have been undertaken, they can then sign in using their organisation's Government Gateway account. Then in order to actually access apprenticeship funding, the employer will have to sign the ESFA employer agreement. As you know, this agreement sets out the terms of using the service and the obligations they are bound to, such as adhering to the apprenticeship funding rules. The agreement also covers areas such as complying with legislation and guidance relating to health and safety and safeguarding, having procedures and processes in place to deal with the prevention of fraud, and ensuring that information on the Apprenticeship Service account is accurate and is kept up to date. The agreement also states the scenarios of when we will terminate this agreement. The transfer funds that you send do not stay in the receiving employer's account. They are credited but then immediately debited to pay for the training provider in line with their ILR submission. So you as sending employers are only responsible for committing to fund the apprenticeship until its completion. The responsibility and liability of the apprenticeship lies solely with the receiving employer. And finally, we do not publish any data or information on individual transfer arrangements. Next slide, please. So we understand that there are already established matching services being run by intermediary bodies, and our Pledge and Transfer Apprenticeship Fund service works alongside these. And we want to ensure that all employers in England have access to see what transfer opportunities are available. So some examples of intermediary bodies are local or combined authorities, chambers of commerce, sector-specific bodies, or local enterprise partnerships. So as mentioned, intermediary bodies will be able to see the transfer opportunities on gov.uk, so they will be able to work with their networks within their location or their sector to help facilitate connections. And from feedback that we've received, we know that some sending employers want to continue to work with intermediaries as they provide them with vital support. So this could be by helping to review their pledge applications, to undertaking any checks on their behalf. So therefore, you are able to export the applications that you have received and share this information with the intermediary body that you are working with. And finally, just from me, I just wanted to highlight that we have produced a range of online resources for both sending and receiving employers, and Nick will go through these towards the end of the webinar. So now I'm going to hand back to Nick. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks, John. That's really useful. Can I just ask for a little point of clarification? I'm aware that we talk about sending and receiving employers. Can we just reconfirm what we mean by a sending employer and a receiving employer? So, Kate or John, will either of you two mind just jumping in at that point and just clarifying that for me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, sorry.
After you, Kate.
Okay, yeah, so sending employer, they are levy paying employers who have unutilised levy funds that they want to share with another organisation. And a receiving employer is actually any employer. So any employer, so that can be employer providers or apprenticeship training agency or flexi job agencies, can receive a transfer of levy funds. So it's not just necessarily for small and medium-sized businesses, it's actually for anyone who employs apprentices. John, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, nothing to add.
Brilliant. I just wanted to get that in my mind and everybody else's mind as we move forward, because we continually use the phrase sending employers and receiving employers. I just wanted to make sure that was crystal clear in everybody's minds as we move forward. Okay, excellent. So if we can move on to the next slide. Brilliant. So yeah, brilliant, John and Kate. Excellent input. So now I'm going to hand over to Natasha Porter. She'll be giving us a look at the sending employer process on the Apprenticeship Service. So Natasha, over to you.
Lovely. Thanks, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. So today what I wanted to do is take you through the journey of how you create a transfer pledge, how you view applications, and how you hopefully approve them. Now, I won't spend too long in this because we have had previous webinars on this, which are all on YouTube, and there's lots of documents on gov.uk. But I thought it was important just to run through it so we're all on the same page, maybe for some employers who've never done this before, but also to use this as an opportunity to pull out any new or enhancements that we've made to the service over the past few months. So first up, as an employer who wants to send a levy transfer, so a levy paying employer, how do you create a transfer pledge? So within your Apprenticeship Service account, under the Finances section, there is a section called Your Transfers, and you're able to click on that and be able to create a pledge to advertise how much money you want to transfer. Next page, please. Then when you're creating a transfer pledge, you've got the option to select how much you want to pledge, so how much you want to transfer, and the option to show or hide your organisation's name, because we know some employers want to remain anonymous at the start of this. And there's also an optional criteria which you can choose to fill in or not regarding the location, sector, type of job role, and level of apprenticeships that you want to fund. And then when you've created that transfer pledge, that's published publicly on gov.uk, where employers, intermediaries and training providers, or really anyone who wants to access it, are able to log in and see all these transfer opportunities or pledges on that gov.uk page. And as Kate said, there's now 125 opportunities since we've made these slides over the past few days. So once you've created a transfer pledge, how do you know if an employer has applied to it? So now you will receive a notification within the task section of your homepage, which you can see here on the right hand side, and you'll get these as a prompt to inform you that you've got an application. And you'll also receive a weekly email summarising any applications you have, and we hope this will make it easier for you to know when you've got applications and hopefully review them in a timely manner. Then when you want to view your applications, you can click on that link and it'll take you through to the list of applications where you're able to view, approve and reject these. And this ensures that you, as the employer who wants to send a levy transfer, you've got control over where that money goes and how that money is spent. So over the past few months, we've been making a number of enhancements to this section of the account. So firstly, you're able to download all applications into an Excel spreadsheet. So if you've received multiple applications, because we know a lot of you have got quite a lot of applications, what this does, it'll make it easier for you to review all of these in one place. And also, if you're working with an intermediary body, you're able to export this to Excel and perhaps share it with them so they can help you in that review and approval process. And you can also, a new feature we've recently released is the ability to sort applications. Yep, thank you. Then when you click into the application, as Kate mentioned earlier, it is important that you take timely action on the applications that you receive. So here we've got contact details for the employer if you did want to follow up with them. And we've also got the About Your Apprenticeship Opportunity section, which we've recently made mandatory because we've spoken to, and I know a lot of employers have said that's a really important section for you to read that and get a little bit to know more about the employer. So we've made that mandatory, so that will be there for all applications going forward. Now, this is another new feature, and it's the ability to, the choices you've got around approving the apprenticeship details. So once you've approved the application, you now have the option regarding how you approve the apprenticeship details. So this really relates to when the receiving employer adds apprenticeship details to the system. So there's two options. You can check and review apprenticeship details, which is really what's always happened if you've ever done a transfer, or the new option around automatically approving the apprenticeship details, which when I do a demo in a second, I'll go into more detail on. And when you accept an application, the status will change to this yellow one here, awaiting acceptance by applicant. The successful applicants are notified via an email when you've accepted their application, and they'll also see this on their account. But we do know that some applicants have yet to accept or decline the offer of transfer funds. So if you wanted to, you are able to reach out to them and perhaps prompt them to accept or decline this offer of funds. And another new feature which we'll talk through in the live demo is you've now got the option to close a pledge. So if for whatever reason you've created a pledge and you think, actually, I don't want this to be live anymore, you can now close it. So what happens is this will no longer be shown publicly on the gov.uk webpage, but you'll still be able to view, approve and reject any pending applications. And also for those applications that you've previously approved, you are still committed to funding these apprenticeships for the duration. Thanks, Nick.
Excellent, thanks, Natasha. So we are just going to make a quick change in the webinar and hand over control to Natasha, who's going to go through a demo for us. So while we're doing that, just bear with us for a second. Can I just remind everybody whilst we're doing this that if you've got any questions for the speakers today, then jot them down in the question facility in the control panel. And can I also just remind people that yes, we are recording today's session, and we will be publishing recordings of the session for you to look back at some point in the future. And I'll go into more details a little bit later on. So are we okay now? Have you got control, Natasha?
We are. Can you see my screen? It should say Barry and Barry Limited.
Yeah, I can. Thank you. So if you want to take us through the demo, that'd be brilliant.
Excellent. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks.
So what I'm going to do now is just take you through some of those new features that I talked through a second ago. So the first one being in your homepage. This is for employers who've already created a transfer pledge and you've now received applications. You'll have this task in the homepage telling you you've got this and really just making it easier for you to keep on top of the applications you're receiving and letting you know when there's an action that's required from you. So when you're ready, you can click on this. And this will take you through to the list of applications. So a few new changes we've made here, again, is the ability to download applications. If you click this, this will be downloaded in an Excel template. So what you can do is you can see all the applications at once, all the information that's in them in one place, making it easier for you to perhaps sort, review offline, or share with an intermediary body if you so wish to. We've also recently introduced the ability to filter the statuses. So here we can maybe group by 100% match and ones that need an action for awaiting approval. And again, just making it easier for you, particularly for the employers who've got quite a lot of applications, just to make it easier for you to help to sort of structure and review these. So when you're ready, you can click into the application. And you can see further information here, so you're able to see the percentage match of the criteria that you've selected against the application details. You could also see information about their apprenticeship opportunity, which we've just recently made mandatory. So for any new applications, applicants will be expected to fill this in, just to help give you some of that information. You can see information if you can afford to fund this training, And you can also see their contact details in case you do want to sort of speak to them offline. Linking in with what Kate said earlier on, and we have made some changes to the text around due diligence, and I have seen that we've got a few questions on this already. So we've revised that wording to be really clear. So what it now says is, you may wish to undertake your own in-house government processes before committing to fund a transfer. The receiving employer will provide you with their contact details as part of the application in order to do this. So what this means is that you don't necessarily need to do any due diligence. It's really up to you as the employer of what your own processes are. And as Kate said earlier, all employers that are on the Apprenticeship Service, they have been verified for us. They've been through the application process where we check that they're a real employer. So that's already been done. It's really if there's anything above and beyond that you as your own business would like to do. But in this case, let's go approve. And again, this is a new section on approving the apprenticeship details. So you've chosen to approve the application. The apprentice details will be added by the applicant or the receiving employer, Bill Hable Construction, to use the funds. So there's now two options to choose from. So you can check and review apprenticeship details. So what this means is you may get multiple prompts if the employer adds apprenticeship details in batches. So for example, if it's a number like 10 apprentices, they may add them all individually. That would be 10 separate prompts. But what you will see is the ability to see the standard, the cost and the dates. And you'll have the option to change the apprenticeship details or ask the employer to. So for any employers on the call who've previously done a transfer via the existing service route, so the connection to an employer that you may know, this automatically happened. There wasn't you didn't have an option to choose another way. But I know we've done a lot of research with employers. The feedback was that it could be quite admin heavy. It seemed a little bit of a duplication. So this new section around automatically approving the apprenticeship details is what we've recently designed and brought in to address that pain point for you. So what this means is you will not check and review the apprenticeship details, including the standard, cost or start date for the application. And the employer or training provider can choose a different apprenticeship standard, but the cost of the apprenticeship details cannot exceed the agreed transfer amount in application. So for this pretend application we're working through now, that was for a bricklayer level 2 for 2 apprentices with a maximum cost of £18,000. So what this means, if you were to choose automatically approve the apprenticeship details, that you won't have oversight of what's been added, but you can be assured that the cost of the transfer will not exceed that £18,000, which was agreed as part of the application. So for now, we're going to click this here, and that's the application approved. So what happens next is we would inform the applicant, so Bill Hable Construction. They will be informed via their account, as well as receive an email application telling them that they've been successful. So one last thing, if I just scroll over, that I wanted to show you is the ability to close a pledge. So for this example, we have 2 transfer pledges. You can see here one that's actually not received any applications. So what we're able to do is to click into this transfer pledge and decide that you may want to close it. So Asha, again, would you like to continue and close this pledge? Yes, please. And it gives a bit more about what this means. So the pledge will no longer be shown publicly and businesses won't be able to apply for funding from it. So that page with 125 pledges, they would be removed from that. And the pledge will continue to fund applications that you've already approved, including applications that you've approved but the applicant has not yet accepted funding. And though closed, you'll still be able to view, approve and reject any applications that you've received for this pledge. So you can see here that that pledge is now closed and the status has been updated to reflect that. So you've got 1 closed pledged and 1 active pledge here. But Nick, that was all for me as a quick demo of some of our new features.
Excellent, Natasha, thank you very much. So now we are going to hand right over to Nicola Drury from Amazon UK Services. And Nicola's going to be sharing with us, some of her experiences of how they've managed transfers within Amazon. So, Nicola, I think we've got the screen back with you. So, over to you, Nicola, and look forward to hearing your input.
Thanks, Nick, and hi everybody. Yeah, so my name's Nicola Drury. I look after the apprenticeships in Amazon across the UK, and obviously I have been looking after the transfers as well. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview, I guess, of our journey so far. We started doing the transfers in 2019 when we could transfer the 25%, and we did that obviously directly with our Amazon sellers. So anyone who sold on Amazon, we had that reach, so we were able to go to them. We did like webinars to really kind of like look at supporting their teams, and it was quite interesting, and I think it was quite a challenge in the respect that people were still not quite sure about apprenticeships, how they worked, getting training providers, etc. So it was really interesting to kind of like see, and we obviously invested time to support the smaller businesses to understand how it all worked and connect with training providers and what they would need to consider, etc. Before hiring or obviously placing somebody in their team in an apprenticeship. So that was that was quite a learning for us in 2019. And when I spoke to other employers as well who had started the transfer, they were very much the same. They're putting quite a lot of resource, a lot of work, and actually there was still a lot of education to do with some of the smaller businesses. So come 2020, we did the £1 million pledge. And we worked with the combined authorities. So we worked with the combined authorities across the UK, and we really saw that increase. And I think what was great about that is that the combined authorities kind of did that bridging. So they had the reach with some of the smaller organisations. They were able to give that administration support, help people get set up on the system, and then obviously reached out to employers to connect. So I think that worked really well. And then obviously last year actually, 2021, we really wanted to grow our transfer fund. And we pledged to 2.5 million, and we looked at 3 buckets. And I'm obviously sharing this with you because I know when I spoke to a lot of employers want to focus maybe on certain areas or certain skills. And we wanted to support our Amazon sellers as always. Anybody who had completed an AWS Restart course, and then the creative industries. So we were doing that directly with SMEs, through providers, through combined authorities. So there was lots going on. We got some really good uptake, but because we were dealing with that directly, again, we wanted to obviously support the smaller businesses on how to set up, admin, training providers, etc. But obviously the audience we were looking to support at that time, or mainly support, was quite targeted. And we still obviously wanted support across the UK, or across England, should I say. So what was great is obviously when this came along, because what is quite hard to do is that reach. So when obviously this was set up, this portal, that kind of really brought everything together, because what it did do, it gave the opportunity for the SME, I'm going to say the SME, obviously the non-levy employer, to go somewhere. So they could either go to the combined authorities, or they could go here, get that support and that process, get set up, get their digital account set up, understand what they were taking on. So all of that was kind of like supported that business, and kind of took that away from the employer who was transferring. So I think that helped, and I think that kind of like increased transfers. So we obviously are more than happy to pilot this last year, and we've seen an increase in transfers where we're seeing people come through this way. And again, one of the great things is, and it's great to see the continuous improvements as well, is that actually you can, as we've been shown, select, is it certain regions you want to support, is it certain skills, certain levels as well. So you still have that option to kind of focus where you want to transfer your funds, and as you've been shown, obviously you see those pledges, and what is really great is that the notes is now mandatory, because one of the things I really liked is when somebody put in what they were doing and why they were doing the apprenticeship, because I think that really, you got to know that kind of seller and what they were doing, and and that was great. And then what I would do is then reach out. To be honest, I'd reach out via obviously the email address and ask them if they were still looking for transfers, if they wanted any help, etc., and just like a bit of an in-house check. And yeah, and then kind of like connected. So we've done quite a few now through the government site. So it's great, and I think it is great that actually we're doing more transfers now as well. There's much more traction, and it's fantastic to support the businesses who are creating roles and skills for people. So it's been great for us, and something we will continue to do and support.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Nicola. That was really excellent to hear how you're making transfers work for you. That's really insightful. So what I'd like to do now is have a look at some of the questions that have come in. And by the way, thank you everybody for the questions that have come in. There have been quite a few. So you've asked quite a lot of us. So we'll try and get those answered as quickly as we can. Remember, we will try and group them into themes rather than asking each individual question. As I mentioned earlier on, if there are questions that we can't get around to today, we'll take an action to get those answered after the webinar, and we'll email them out to everybody that's attended, so you can get visibility of what we are saying to you. So my panel, can I ask if you're ready to get some questions? The first one I've got is for John. John, there's a question here about due diligence checks, and I'm picking up on what you mentioned earlier on in the presentation and what Nicola's talked about. Can you give any advice on what due diligence checks and the level of detail that an employer should go into before sending a transfer?
Yes, of course, Nick. So Kate covered this in her presentation on the slide that was titled Assurance. So first of all, it's important to understand what checks the ESFA does. So the ESFA, for anybody to be on the Apprenticeship Service and therefore be able to recruit an apprentice, have to have a PAYE number, so they have to be a genuine business. Also, they have to sign the employer agreement, which ties them to all of our funding rules. So there is a degree of checks that we do already. I would prefer not to use the term due diligence for to describe the work that a sending employer might want to do, but clearly you will need to assure yourselves that the employers that you want to support are the right employers for you. I think Nicola gave a good overview of how important it is to have a look at the notes that the employer that wants to receive the funds gives to you in terms of describing why it is they want to receive some of your funds, and importantly, have a conversation with them or have an email exchange with them. But again, it's very important to understand, as a sending employer, it is not your responsibility for the apprentice. It is the receiving employer that is responsible for the apprentice. It's the provider that's working with that employer that is responsible for their training. So all you're doing is facilitating the transfer of some funds to support this activity. Nevertheless, it is important that you are content that organisation is the right one for you to be sending funds to.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, John. I've got a couple of questions for you, so if you can just keep your mic open for a second, I've got 3 or 4 for you. The next one we have is around expiry of funds. So an employer here is noting they've got some funds expiring from their account in February and asks, is it too late now to transfer that money?
I think the short answer is yes. Obviously, when you are making a transfer, you don't make a big transfer in bulk. The transfer only occurs when an apprentice has started with the receiving employer, and then as long as they are in learning, hopefully they'll be in learning all the way through to completion. So if you have funds which are due to expire, whilst you could set up a transfer, you'd have to probably agree to do this very quickly, and the apprentice would have to be ready to go. So I don't think there's sufficient time now. It's very much about thinking ahead with your transfers. You really need to be thinking at least a quarter ahead probably 6 months ahead, because best will in the world, because an apprentice has to be in place, the receiving employer has got to have time to find that apprentice, to get them in place and to start them. So even if you agree to, today were to agree to support a particular receiving employer for X number of apprentices, those apprentices wouldn't be starting for perhaps 2 or 3 months realistically, and it's only at that point that you start spending your apprenticeship levy on supporting them.
Okay, cool, thank you. And then a question from this is a training provider who's also a levy payer. So can a levy employer who is also a training provider transfer some of their levy funds to another employer?
Yes, although there is a rule in our funding rules which prevents them from also doing the training for that particular employer. So it'd have to be an employer that they're not going to be doing the training for.
Okay, cool. There's then another question about, I think it's about definitions around employers. And we might have mentioned earlier on in the presentation something about smaller businesses receiving transfer pledges or receiving transfers funding from large levy paying employers. So it's not necessarily about being small, it's about being eligible for transfer, isn't it? Could you just clarify that, John?
Yeah, so anybody is eligible to receive a transfer. Anybody that's on the Apprenticeship Service and wants to employ apprentices can receive a transfer, be they a very small business or a very large business. About 62% of businesses that are supported at the moment are small businesses, with the remainder being large businesses that receive levy transfers. And this might be, for example, some organisations choosing to support the local NHS trust, for example, a local ambulance service, who are obviously large levy payers, but again, the sending employer's got a good reason to want to support them.
Okay, thank you. Natasha, a couple of quick questions for you, if I may. The first one, is there a local list of SMEs who are asking for funds, or does the levy employer need to select them?
That's a good question. No, it's been designed the opposite way. So it's been designed so the large levy paying employer can advertise the funds on that gov.uk page that we showed earlier on, the one with 125 pledges, and then the SME or any employer who's looking for a transfer, regardless of their size, they can go on that and they can apply for it. So it's really the other way around.
Okay, and then there's a question. So there's the opportunity that's through the transfer service. Well, there's also a question here. Then, how do I transfer levy to an already connected company who's received a levy transfer from us previously?
So if they've previously received a levy transfer, that doesn't change anything regarding the system. If it's a new request for a transfer, you can use the pledge if that's what you want to do, or alternatively, you can still use the previous system where you connect with them via the traditional transfer route. So that doesn't change your options. You can still use both options here.
Okay, cool. Then another question for you, Natasha, while I've got you. Use from an employer that says, can I only transfer funds to a business that pays the levy? I think we know that's a no. You can fund.
No, you can transfer funds to any employer, regardless, levy, non-levy, small, big, doesn't matter.
But it says here the follow-up to that is, or can they register on DAS and then we transfer funds over? So a receiving employer would need to be registered on the Apprenticeship Service, wouldn't they?
Yes, any employer who wants to receive a transfer would need to have an Apprenticeship Service account. And the reason that's the case is so that we know they're a valid employer. We've already done our checks on them.
Yeah, thank you. John, in terms of the 119, actually it was 125, I think we said, wasn't it, pledges on there at the minute. Do we know how many employers have received funding of transfers funding from those 125 pledges?
Yes, we do. It's a relatively small number at the moment. As I said, it takes a good number of months realistically to get from a pledge to actually the apprentice starting. So the early pledges that started at the end of September, we're really only seeing starts happening sort of early in this year. We are going to publish stats on this every month. We publish data on apprenticeship and traineeship performance and transfers. We're going to greatly expand the amount of information we publish on transfers. And we are seeing lots of employers, lots of interest for every single pledge that is coming forward. We're seeing, plenty of interest from people who want to be supported. So we're confident that the pledging service is working very well in terms of connecting people. What we want to emphasise today is the importance of staying in touch with those organisations that are wanting to receive funds, as they may have apprentices ready to start. And so it's really important that sending employers engage with them quickly and respond to them and say, yes, either we're going to support you or no, we're not.
Okay, thank you. And then there's quite a few questions about how the transfer of levy funds is actually paid through to the receiving employers. So there's some saying, can we pay the whole amount? And there's others saying, does it come out monthly? So can you just confirm how the funding flows from sending employers to receiving employers, John?
Yeah, so it comes out monthly from when the apprentice starts until there's a change, i.e. they leave early or they complete. So it could be that you are paying out on a monthly basis for perhaps 1 or 2 years, depending on the duration of the apprenticeship. One of the things you can choose to select as part of the pledge is the level that you wish to support, and therefore that means that you, if you feel you've only got funds for a year, maybe you feel not confident that you're going to have funds beyond that. Perhaps you just want to support shorter duration apprenticeships, so perhaps level 2 apprenticeships, for example. So in thinking about how much to pledge, then you need to bear in mind that you're signing up for a long-term commitment and that funds will progressively go out over the coming years. So it's not just about a transfer allowance for this year, it's about a transfer allowance for future years as well, which is obviously something we're going to look at in the finance changes that Kate talked about earlier.
Really interesting question here, John, about the part of the rationale for building up or sending transfers through supply chains is about building relationships with those supply chains. There's then a question about whether or not the sending employer could then negotiate discounts on goods or services as a result of transfers, and so they're saying what exactly is allowed or not allowed, and how is this audited?
Okay, well, I think as I mentioned before in the answer about the training provider, when you're making a transfer, you can't make a transfer conditional on signing up to something. It's very much about passing your funds on, not putting any strings onto it. If anybody's concerned that strings are being placed on a transfer, then they should get in touch with RASF help desk.
Okay, excellent, thank you for that. And then just to confirm again, so the funding rules previously meant that if you were a sending employer, you couldn't also be a receiving employer, but that's changed now. There's flexibility on that, John?
Yes, that's right. Several large employers told us that they would like to send funds or receive funds, but couldn't because they'd already made a transfer. So we changed the rule from the 1st of February, so that if you've previously been a sending employer, you can now receive funds as well. So hopefully that's a welcome change, which recognises that businesses change over time and their priorities change. Perhaps their business has grown and no longer wants to send, and in fact could do with receiving some more funds in. So you're able to do that now.
Okay. And then John, there's a question here from a relatively new member of staff within their business, and saying they wonder if there's any general training around management of apprentices and levy funding as they're new to this role.
Well, I think the first thing I'd do, Nick, is to direct them to the ESF blog. I think probably at the end of this, you'll be putting the slide up, which will show all of the different sort of training packages support that we do. Obviously, we record webinars about how to access the apprenticeship service. Training providers, your training provider can help out with training. Or another good source of information support is the local Apprenticeship Ambassador Network. If you Google Apprenticeship Ambassador Network, then you'll be able to find employers on there who are active ambassadors, who many of whom will be very happy to help you out in terms of how to use the service and understand the benefits for apprenticeships. And indeed, hopefully you'll become an apprenticeship ambassador yourself.
Yeah, and just to confirm, I will go through some of the other support that's available, and include details of some of the how-to videos that we've produced. John's right about the blog, and I'll cover some of those already. But what I will mention here specifically is that we're just working on a series of manage apprenticeships webinars. So we're looking to hold over the next couple of months one for non-levy employers, levy employers, and for training providers, where we'll go through some of the key journeys through the apprenticeship service, so that you can see some of those journeys run through. They are being developed at the moment, and we hope to advertise those quite soon. Okay, so with that, Kate, there's a question for you. If you've got any unspent levy funds but not enough that would fund a full apprentice for the entire duration, is there any way that you can still pledge funds to be available to other organisations?
So the pledge amount does need to is based on the financial year, but you do need to have funds available to cover the duration of the apprenticeship training and assessment costs. So if you don't have that, then obviously you won't be able to support that for the entire duration. But what I would point out is transfer allowances are recalculated on an annual basis in April. So potentially come April that you may have some more transfer funds that you are able to pledge. But yes, there is the commitment that you will fund the apprenticeship for its entire duration.
Okay, and then while I've got you again, Kate, there's another one for you. If you're rejecting a transfer application, can this be challenged or appealed by the person who's applying? If a business matches your criteria, however their business ethos doesn't match yours, is this grounds to reject an application?
It's entirely the sending employer's choice as to who they send their funds to. So there is no appeal process with us. It's entirely down to the sending employer. It's what you feel comfortable with, the employers that you want to work with. As John mentioned, it might be that you share values. So yeah, it's entirely down to yourselves, and there is no appeal process built into the service.
Okay, thank you. And then John, what happens in the scenario that a receiving employer wants funding for a number of starts, but the sending employer has only got sufficient funds for a smaller number? So let's pick figures. Say the receiving employer wants funding for 5 starts, but the sending employer can only fund 3. What happens in that sort of scenario?
Okay, so in that circumstance, I would say it's probably best to contact the receiving employer, and for the sending employer to contact the receiving employer via email, or to give them a call based on the details that have been supplied, and have that conversation to reject the first pledge, but get them to put a further pledge in for a smaller number of apprentices, and do it on that sort of basis.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so Natasha, would one pledge be needed? So what is that? So would only one pledge need to be created, even if the amount available would cover multiple apprenticeships?
No, it's really up to you how you create your pledges. Now you can create a pledge which is fully open, so it just says the big amount of money you want to transfer with no criteria, or equally you've got a specific criteria in mind, like some employers want to keep the money in their supply chain, they want it kept in a certain part of England. You can create that specific criteria, but a pledge is open to as many applications as essentially you can afford.
Okay, brilliant. And then so let's have a look. Kate, question for you. Can you transfer? Oh no, actually we've done that. Can you transfer? Oh no, go on. This is slightly different. Can you transfer funds to a specific local business, or is it just the local area?
So again, it's entirely your choice. So if you do have a specific local business that you have in mind, you might want to go down the direct connection route. So contact them and make that connection outside of the pledge criteria. But as Natasha said, you can set the criteria on your pledge to your specific location. So for example, I'm based in Coventry, so I might just want to support people in Coventry and Birmingham area, but so I can actually specify that on my pledge. But again, it is entirely down to you as the sending employer.
Okay. And John, what happens to funds that either expire from levy paying employers' accounts or aren't used or pledged?
So Any unspent funds which expire are used by the ESFA to essentially pay for small businesses' apprentices. So they're not wasted. The major benefit of doing a transfer, of course, is that you are able to direct where you want your funds to be utilised. So which businesses, which geographies. So expiring funds, as I say, those funds aren't going to waste. They're going to be used to support small businesses who don't pay the levy.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. And I've lost my space while I was looking for another question, so bear with me just 2 seconds. And what I will say is that we're coming up to the end of our time. So what I'd like to do is steal just a little bit more time, just another couple of minutes, if I may, just to carry on with some of these questions, because I think there's some really useful questions that we can ask and answer here. Yes, if you don't mind, I'll just steal another couple of minutes onto the webinar. So John, another question for you. What's the process if a trainee leaves or resigns during the training duration? Will the spend cease automatically from the sending employer?
Yeah, so the spend will cease as soon as the training provider submits the individualised learning record, the ILR record, which is a record of learning for the apprentice. So as soon as that's closed off and is closed off on the Apprenticeship Service, then no more funds will be sent to the receiving employer.
Okay, cool. And then Natasha, just a couple of quick questions around pledging. So how is the amount of money that's to be pledged set? Is there a standard that you select from? Is there a minimum amount?
So you can pledge up to 25% of your levy allowance. So when you go into the Create My Pledge section, it will show you what your 25% allowance is, and it's up to you to choose how much you want to commit to transfers from that amount.
Okay, and then a question about the auto approve function. So if a pledge has been auto approved, is there any scope that the receiving employer changes things within that? So i.e. changes the standard, but still sits within the funding amount, and would the sending employer necessarily know?
So it's a good question. If you as a sending employer choose to auto approve, what that means is you don't get to check and approve the apprenticeship details. So in theory, yes, the standard could change, but it won't. It's only if it's changed and it goes above the application amount is when it will be rejected. So if you've approved an application for £18,000 and the new standard costs 19,000, that would be rejected because you've not authorised that value of money. But anything under 18,000 in that example would be approved.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And then just 2 more questions if I can, both for you, Natasha. How detailed is the location option on the criteria at the moment, i.e. regional, town, city, etc.?
At the moment, it is based on towns and cities. It's not yet at a regional or local authority level. That is something that we're working up. It is proven to be pretty complicated, which I'm not going to get into now. But what we have done is increase the limit of how many towns or cities you can select. So I think it's now up to 15 if you wanted to select quite a lot. And what you're able to do is look at some of the existing pledges and see how other people have used it.
Okay, cool. And then the last question I'm going to ask today is then, Natasha, for you, who holds the contract with the training provider? Is it the employer making the transfer or the employer receiving the transfer?
It's the employer receiving the transfer. They hold the relationships. They're responsible for it. All you're doing is giving them some levy. You're not accountable for anything else.
Okay, thank you very much. Guys on the panel, thank you so much for answering those questions and giving that clarification. That was really, really helpful. And everybody on the call that submitted a question, we really appreciate it. And like we said, we will endeavour to answer any of those questions that we haven't been able to get round to and answer during this call. And we'll be sending out replies to those in the coming week or so. So if I could just finish off with a couple of slides, please. So yeah, okay, so if you don't already, then I'd urge you to follow us on Twitter and at ESFA Digital, This is a great way of keeping up to date with what we do and latest releases within the service. We tweet about stuff in new things that happen in the service, new developments, as well as information about future webinars like today's. And we also give some hints and tips. So if you use Twitter, please do follow us. Next slide, please. We mentioned some of the support videos that are available. So if you look at ESFA Gov UK YouTube channel, there are 3 playlists on there where you can find information about the Apprenticeship Service. So all of the support videos that we have that cover the different functions of the Apprenticeship Service are in the Using the Apprenticeship Service playlist, and you can find things on there like how to register an account, how to add an apprentice, how to recruit an apprentice, and they might be particularly useful if you've got new staff. The recordings from our webinars are available on the Apprenticeship Service webinar recording playlist, and that's where a copy of today's recording will appear in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. And then videos created to support the delivery of apprenticeships in general are available on the Apprenticeship Support Videos playlist. And we add new stuff on there all the time, so please go and have a look at that, and do subscribe. And if you do subscribe, you'll get a bell icon and get an alert when new content is uploaded. And then the next sheet. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, brilliant. So on this slide, we've got quite a few links to places you can go to access more support. And I've put a PDF document together that you can access under the control panel under handouts now, so you don't have to scribble all these details down. What I will say is, if you haven't seen apprenticeships.gov.uk already, if you've not visited that site, I'd strongly recommend that you have a look at that. It's got lots and lots of information on there that's great for employers and providers about apprenticeships and the Apprenticeship Service. So I think this should be your new favourite place on the internet to go for anything about apprenticeships. You can also look out for our ESFA digital blog. We publish blogs that cover quite a wide range of subjects. We've got a link to our webinar platform on there. So what you'll be able to do there is find out some of the future webinar details that we have, and we update that sort of fairly regularly. But we'll also be putting an on-demand recording of today's session on that link as well, and we'll have that recording available for about 3 weeks. Whilst we get the other one uploaded onto YouTube and make sure that's fully accessible. And then finally, if you've got any specific queries about the Apprenticeship Service, you can use the self-service support tool, and those details are on the slide as well. Okay, so that's us. That brings us to the end of our session. Thank you for joining us. I think it's really good to see the numbers that we got joining the call today, and thank you to the presenters. I think you brilliant updates today. So thank you very much for your input and insights. And remember, as you leave the webinar now, please go to that short survey and complete that for us, because we really value your feedback. So bye everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much.